Welcome back to Darnley Cyber Café, where we brew up the latest in cybersecurity, technology, and the digital world that shapes our lives. I'm your host, Darnley, and today, just pour yourself something strong because I'm going to talk about one of the most repeated phrases in European tech policy right now, EU digital sovereignty. You've seen it on LinkedIn, you've seen it in government white papers, you've probably heard it in a meeting room where someone said ditch Microsoft and everyone nodded like they solved something. Today, I want to challenge that. Not because I don't think Europe should invest in its own digital future, it absolutely should, but because the current conversation is confusing a procurement decision for a security strategy, and that confusion is genuinely dangerous. Let me start with a question. When you moved your data to a European data center, or when your government mandated it, did anyone ask who found the last 10 critical vulnerabilities in the browser your employees use every day? I'll tell you the answer. Google, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, all American companies. The entire bug bounty ecosystem, the financial and operational infrastructure that incentivizes security researchers to find vulnerabilities and report them rather than sell them, runs on US money, US researchers, and US disclosure programs. Google's Vulnerability Reward Program, Apple's Security Bounty, Microsoft's Security Response Center, these are the programs that are literally paying the people who find the bugs that would otherwise suddenly own your sovereign infrastructure. And here's the thing that no one says out loud at the EU Sovereignty Conference. A meaningful number of European researchers who do this work are being paid by those exact American programs, because that is where the money is. That is where the structure exists. That is where reporting a vulnerability is worth doing. Now, I just want to be clear about what I'm not saying. I am not saying European researchers are inferior. I have personally worked with some outstanding security professionals in the industry who are based in Europe, and I'm not saying that data residency is irrelevant. There are legitimate compliance and legal reasons why European data should live on European soil. GDPR is real, NIS2 is real, these matter. But what I'm saying is that data residency is not the same as security independence. And right now, the public conversation is treating them as if they are. And that's where I have the problem. Let me walk you through what the technology stack actually looks like, because I think most people, including a lot of people making these policy decisions, have not thought this all the way down. So, you move to a Finnish data center. Your data is in Finland. Great. Now, let's go one layer at a time. The hypervisor running your virtual machines, the software that your servers actually live inside, has had vulnerabilities this year. Those vulnerabilities were reported to a US company's security team. They patched it. You applied the patch. That is the chain of trust your sovereign infrastructure depends on right now. The TLS library your HTTPS connections run on, the thing that encrypts your data in transit, was patched 3 weeks ago by an American researcher. Through a US-administered CVE, the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures Database, by the way, is operated by the Meteor Corporation under a contract with the US Department of Homeland Security. Every time you quote a CVE number, you are citing American infrastructure. The firmware on the drivers in those Finnish servers, written in California or Texas, signed with a US company's cryptographic key. You are trusting that firmware every time those drives read or write your sovereign data. BGP, the Border Gateway Protocol that routes traffic across the internet. Its architecture is American. The largest route holders are American. DNS, the system that translates domain names into addresses, has a root zone operated by ICANN, a California nonprofit. The undersea cables that physically carry your data, Google owns cables, Meta owns cables, Subcom, which is part of a General Dynamics, builds its own cables. And the chips in those servers, TSMC in Taiwan, ARM architecture out of the UK, now owned by a Japanese company, Intel in California, NVIDIA in California. The instruction sets your sovereign workloads to run on, which are not European. So what's the point? What you have built is a European flagged building sitting on top of an American technology stack. The flag on the building is real, the independence underneath it is not. Now, I'm going to talk about GDPR because I know someone is listening to this right now thinking, yes, but GDPR changed everything. And in some ways it did. It created real accountability for data handling. It generated billions in fines for companies that violated it. It changed how businesses think about data collection globally, and I give credit to that. But I want you to think about what GDPR actually is. It is a legal framework that regulates what companies do with personal data. It is, to put bluntly, a compliance instrument. It does not fund a single security researcher. It does not build one chip fab. It does not maintain one open source cryptographic library. It does not pay for one penetration test on one piece of European critical infrastructure. It does not create one vulnerability disclosure program. What it did produce, in terms of the actual user experience, is the most aggressive cookie consent regime in the world, a regime so complex it broke the user experience of almost every European website, while changing exactly 0 things about who owns the infrastructure those websites run on. The companies being fined under GDPR treat those fines as a cost of doing business. They've actually budgeted for it. They have an entire legal teams for it, and they are still running your data through their American infrastructure. That is not sovereignty, that is theater. Expensive, well-intentioned, legally sophisticated theater. I want to tell you something I've seen in this work without naming names for obvious reasons. I have been brought in to assess the security posture of organizations that had been recently completed that they described as a sovereignty migration. They were proud of it. They had moved everything off US cloud providers. They were compliant, they had the certifications on the wall. And when we did the actual security assessment, when we looked at what was running and what wasn't being monitored, the picture was not good, because in their focus of where the data lived, they had not invested proportionally in how the data was being protected. The monitoring wasn't there. The threat hunting wasn't happening. The incident response plan was a document that hadn't been updated in 2 years and named people who even left the organization. So they had sovereignty on paper. They had a breach waiting to happen in practice. And I'll tell you what I told them. An attacker does not care about your compliance certification. They care whether you can see them when they're inside your network. So, what does real digital sovereignty actually require? Because I'm not just here to say the current approach is wrong without telling you what right looks like. I've thought about this a lot, and I want to give you the honest version. Real sovereignty requires a European bug bounty ecosystem at scale, not reports, not assessments, actual money flowing to researchers who find vulnerabilities in software that European critical infrastructure runs on. The financial incentive to report rather than sell. Now, right now, The most lucrative path for talented European security researcher is a US company's bounty program. Europe needs to change that equation. Real sovereignty requires investment in the open source cryptographic and systems libraries that real infrastructure actually runs on. With dedicated funded security audits, not one-time grants, sustained funding, because attackers don't stop looking and defenses can't stop either. Real sovereignty requires a European vulnerability disclosure infrastructure, a CVE equivalent program that Europe runs, funds, and gives researchers a reason to use. CVE is a US government-funded system. The world's vulnerability catalog is American, and that has implications. Real sovereignty requires serious semiconductor investment, and I mean serious. TSMC building a fab in Desrin is a start, and I'll give credit for that, but it is a decade late and currently producing legacy nodes, not the cutting-edge chips that matter for the next generation of computing. And real sovereignty requires funding security research at universities with an explicit practical mandate, not just academic publications, but a pipeline that gets researchers into the room where actual deployed software gets patched. Now, you have to understand the uncomfortable truth here is that Europe has been having this conversation since 2013, since Snowden, since the world found out the extent of US surveillance programs. That was 12 years ago. 12 years of conferences, white paper, LinkedIn posts, and political speeches about digital independence. And in that same 12 years, what has the research investment looked like at scale? Horizon Europe, the EU's flagship research and innovational program, allocates roughly 13 billion euros across 7 years for all digital and space research combined. For context, Google's bug bounty program alone has paid out over $12 million to fund vulnerabilities in one browser. I'm not saying the European investment is zero. I'm saying it's not proportionate with the claim being made about independence, not even close. The people who actually secure the internet, the researchers filing CVEs at 2 a.m, arguing with vendor triage teams, spending months getting ignored before going public on a 0 day, they are not thinking about your cookie banner. They are doing a job. And right now, they are mostly being paid by the companies Europe says it wants to be independent from. As you listen to the Café, you understand that I'm always direct and always honest, because I want to be direct about what I think the risk is here, because this is not just an abstract policy argument. The risk is that European organizations, businesses, government agencies, critical infrastructure operators make significant procurement and architectural decisions based on a sovereignty narrative that gives them a false sense of security. They move the data, they get the certification, they brief the board. Everyone feels good, and the actual security work, the monitoring, threat hunting, patching, cadence, the incident response planning, gets treated as secondary to the geography question. And that's just backwards. I've seen it. The flag on the server does not protect you. The security team watching what's happening on the server protects you. And if your sovereignty migration consumed the budget and attention that should have gone into building that capability, you are in a worse position than you were before. Geography is not a security control. So what's the takeaway here? What do I want you to actually do with this? Well, number one, separate the compliance question from the security question. Data residency may be a genuine regulatory requirement for your organization. If it is, you should absolutely address it. But treat it as the compliance exercise as it is, and make sure your security investment is not being cannibalized to fund the migration. Number 2, audit your actual security posture, not your procurement decisions. Where is your data? Fine. Now, who's watching it? What does your threat detection look like? How long would it take you to discover that someone was inside your network? What is the number that matters? Not which flag is on the data center. Number 3, understand your real dependency chain. Trace it. Firmware, hypervisors, libraries, protocols, DNS, BGP, chips. You do not have to solve all of it, but you should know what it looks like. Informed decisions are better than comfortable ones. Number 4, support the researchers. If you are in a position to influence procurement or investment decisions, push for funding that goes to actual security research, bug bounty programs, open source library audits, vulnerability disclosure infrastructure. That is where real security improvements come from. And number 5, be honest about what sovereignty is and is not. In a boardroom, in a policy meeting, on LinkedIn, if someone is claiming that a server migration is a security strategy, push back. Ask them to trace the stack. Ask them what their dwell time is. Ask them who would they call at 2 a.m. if something goes wrong. That is more useful conversation than which country's flag is on the building. So there you have it. Europe can achieve genuine digital sovereignty. I believe that. It has the talent. It has the institutions. It has the economic weight to make it happen. But it requires honesty about how far away that outcome currently is, and it requires investing in the unglamorous, technical, slow-moving work that actually creates security, not the headline-friendly procurement decisions that create the appearance of it. Until Europe funds real security research at scale, until there is a European program that a talented researcher anywhere in the world would choose over Google's VRP, EU sovereignty is a LinkedIn buzzword, a well-intentioned, politically useful, genuinely important long-term goal that is being treated right now as if it has already been achieved. And that gap between the rhetoric and the reality is where the risk lives. So the flag on the server is not sovereignty. The work is sovereignty, and that work has barely started. That's all for today's episode of Darnley Cyber Café. Thank you for stopping by the cafe. If this episode made you think twice about what digital sovereignty actually means for your organization, then it did its job. Don't wait until a breach makes the geography of your servers irrelevant. Build the security capability first. The server location can follow. I hope you enjoy this new format, as I have been requested by many of you to dig a little deeper and show some of my security muscle. Next episode, I'll be back with another topic from the front lines of the digital world. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Until then, stay cyber aware, know your stack, fund the researchers, keep that coffee strong, and knowledge is your power. This is Darnley Cyber Café, signing off.